how do we keep building our economies while we make sure that the economy also is resilient? This is the double conundrum. We have to weave in resilience into the growth story rather than first row and then think about climate action. We've got to do it simultaneously. This is the formula. Hi, I'm Arunabha Ghosh. I'm the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. And this year I'm serving as Special Envoy for COP30, representing South Asia. Well, we have to recognize that countries in the Global South, including my region in South Asia, we are faced with a double conundrum. The first is that we are fast-growing economies, and that's a good thing. We have to lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and those who are out of poverty have to keep improving their lives. And at the same time, we are becoming more and more vulnerable to climate extremes. In South Asia, nearly half the population, about 750 million people, have been impacted by some kind of extreme climate event over the last 2 decades. By 2030, we're looking at about $160 billion of damages in this region alone. Across Asia, when you compare to other continents, the maximum number of extreme climate events happening in Asia, the maximum number of people impacted happening in Asia, economic damages going up. So how do we keep building our economies while we make sure that the economy also is resilient? This is the double conundrum. We cannot have an approach towards climate action which is basically no economic growth or suspension of consumption. So in order to do this, we have to weave in resilience into the growth story rather than first row and then think about climate action. We've got to do it simultaneously. This is the formula. And in that formula, several things have to happen. First, understanding climate risk assessments in a very granular way in terms of how will this impact our economies. At CEEW, we have done some analysis. We find that in developing countries, when extreme climate events impact them, in 60% of the cases, you're not even counting all the economic losses. So what you're counting is, yes, an event happened. You're perhaps counting the loss of lives, but you're not counting the economic impacts. When you look at least developed countries, that ratio rises to 90%. Means 90% of the time, we are not counting the full economic impact. So we need to do this in a much more detailed, what we in a technical way call hyper-local way. Assessing the risk and assessing the economic consequences of that risk so that it's not just for disaster first responders, it's not just for the environment ministries, it becomes a central issue for a Ministry of Economy, a Ministry of Finance, a Ministry of Commerce in the emerging economies and developing countries. That's step number one. Step number two is that we have to then link this to early warning systems. Across the world, extreme climate events are increasing. We call this non-linear risks. Non-linear risk means that what was extreme yesterday has become a normal today. What is an extreme event today becomes a normal tomorrow. So averages don't help us anymore. Put more simply, the past is no longer a predictor of the future. So in order to save lives, save livelihoods, you have to give advance warning. And for that, you need better forecasting, but you also need better outreach of the information to vulnerable communities. Those vulnerable communities could be along the coasts. They could even be inland and suddenly impacted by urban flooding. Providing early warning is critical to save lives. In India, for instance, a super cyclone in the late 1990s cost about 10,000 lives. A similar sized cyclone by 2019 cost less than 70 lives. Why? Because we were able to get those early warning announcements out. We've seen similar attempts in other parts of South Asia, whether it's Bangladesh, other parts of Southeast Asia, and so forth. So this is very important, but it has to go beyond the course. How do we increase early warning coverage to 100% of the flood-impacted population within cities? How do we increase early warning signs to mountainous populations, which might be impacted by landslides and so forth? So this combination of hyperlocal assessment combined with early warning will help to save lives and save livelihoods. A third thing that has to be done is we have to build more climate resilient infrastructure. What does that mean? Today, if we are building a road, the road's integrity might get impacted with extreme heat stress. If we are building a bridge across a gorge, the bridge's integrity could be impacted by landslides. If we are a coastal city, the embankments that are built might be overwhelmed by rising sea levels. Infrastructure will need to be built, but how you build it will depend on how you're assessing those risks. How you finance it will depend on the return on investment. What is the return on investment here? It is the avoidance of losses. So we have to create financing models here where the infrastructure that is built to be resilient against climate risks will be perhaps marginally more expensive, but that expense is amortized over the life of that infrastructure. That infrastructure should also be modular so that you can, say, raise the level of the flood embankments, where you can reinforce bridges, etc., as our understanding of climate risk becomes better and as the risk rises. So you build in resilience for 10 years, 15 years, you reassess the risk, and in a modular way, you reinforce that infrastructure. How will you finance it? That's step number 4. In order to finance it, one idea I've already given, amortizing the costs in return for avoided losses. For every dollar invested, about $30 of losses can be avoided in resilient infrastructure. But equally, when you talk about city governments, state governments, you have to think about more innovative financing. We again estimate that there is huge potential, as is being demonstrated in India, for instance, in Tamil Nadu and elsewhere, that municipal bonds and municipal green bonds can be a way to draw in more capital to invest in such resilient infrastructure. The final step here is, what do we do about the nature of infrastructure? And here we need to actually have nature as infrastructure. You save a lot more money and a lot more material by avoiding cement if you focus on nature-based solutions. Investing in mangroves along the coast, investing in sponge cities in inland areas can absorb a lot of the excess rainfall and precipitation, the flooding, etc., that can happen, instead of just building cemented embankments. Nature-based solutions need to be integrated. This blue-green infrastructure needs to be integrated into our gray-black infrastructure. So once we put all these building blocks in place, from risk assessment and understanding its risk to the economy, to putting in early warning, to thinking about the type of modular infrastructure that is resilient, to thinking about innovative financing, and also to bring in nature-based solutions, this will give us the framework around which we can continue to grow our economies on one hand and yet keep them resilient against a rising climate risk assessment. Food security is absolutely critical for any economy, rich or poor. The question is, how will we ensure food security? Is it by growing more and more food, or is it from growing the right kind of food? Secondly, is it from increasing calories, or is it by increasing nutrition? If we accept these two conditions, that we need to grow the right kind of food and ensure that there is the right nutrient content going into our bodies, then our approach to food security and our approach to sustainable agriculture and our approach to climate change actually begins to converge. Agriculture is crudely a function of seeds, soils, and water. We have to make sure all three are compatible with a changing climate. So number one, when we talk about seeds, yes, there is the first green revolution was about high yielding varieties of seeds for rice, for wheat, for maize. But there are also seeds, there are types of crops that have traditionally been in our geographies, whether in South Asia, whether it's in East Asia, whether it's in Sub-Saharan Africa, which have always delivered more nutrition. And some of those are come in the form of millets. So we have to start thinking about more climate friendly, climate positive, nature positive, and nutrition oriented seeds. And think about the shift in our dietary patterns. Secondly, with regards to soils, there is a lot of nutrient content in the soils. Human civilization rests on 6 inches of soil. That is what has been the secret of settled human civilization for the last 10,000 years. We've got to reverse land degradation. That is the secret to using the nutrients in the soil, reversing soil erosion, increasing the absorption of carbon in the soil, increasing output of agriculture product, reducing fertilizer and especially chemical fertilizer use. So the importance of soils is absolutely central towards a more climate secure food future. And then comes the third part, which is water. Across the world, we are seeing water stress building up, including in areas which used to be water surplus. We are seeing water stress, and which were already water stressed, we are observing increasing water scarcity. At least 1 in 5 calories in the world is traded. And yet we are often trading water-intensive crops from water stress zones to other places. So we are exporting virtual water. So we have to understand that conserving and managing water in a way which is efficient and that each drop of water is used multiple times over helps us to again secure a food and climate friendly future. Now, how does all these three things come together between seeds, between soil and water? Number one, we have to change our sustainable agriculture practices. In many parts of the world, traditional wisdom needs to be combined with modern technology, precision agriculture, mulching, rainwater harvesting. We see this in India. Of about 140 million hectares, 5 different agricultural practices which are sustainable have crossed over 5 million hectares. But we have about 30 odd sustainable agricultural practices. So this potential for huge scale up of this, it cannot be overstated. Once we start doing that, we then shift farmers' behaviors towards those practices that they already had inherited, but they have forgotten in recent years. The second thing that we need to do is change our procurement. So often middlemen or government procures products, or even large companies procures these products. When we send a different procurement signal to the farmers change the kinds of seeds and the crops that they grow. So we can leverage government procurement for more procurement of millets over water-consuming rice, for instance, or shift towards more nutritional products for midday meals served in schools. The power of government procurement and the power of corporate procurement can really pull farmers towards more sustainable practices. And the third thing that has to happen is we have to change final consumer choices. kind of labelings, information on nutrition content, shifting away from highly processed foods towards more farm to fork patterns of consumption, more locally grown products, etc., will realign our diets to our climatic conditions in exactly the same way that our grandparents used to eat and live. Once we start aligning the soil to the gut, we will see that seed, soil, and water becomes a bridge for improving not just agriculture practices, but improving farmers' incomes, supporting smallholder farmers, and making it much more climate resilient. This is the holistic approach that we need. We all have to play a part, but if we played it strategically, the story can begin to look very different. We can have a second green revolution, which can be focused more on this combination of seeds, soil, and water. The main issue when it comes to sustainability is risk. When we see that certain technologies have developed, we do not see them deployed at scale. When we see certain technologies being successful in a lab, we don't see them coming out into the market. When we think about someone who has a great idea, they often do not get the early stage venture funding to develop that idea even in the lab. So whether we are looking at the scaled up market, whether we are looking at only the market entry, or whether we are looking at product innovation right at the upstream end, everywhere there are risks for technologies that are not fully mature. When you see that, policies also tend to be conservative. We all recognize that we need to go down a sustainable pathway, but governments might be resistant to make big commitments, have big ambitions, if they don't know whether the technologies will succeed or fail. What do we need then? We need to celebrate failure rather than just highlight successes. And we need to do it many times over so that we then chance upon the right mix of technology, finance, business model, policy, and consumer behavior to take more sustainable products and services to scale. This is where the role of the Zayed Sustainable Rise comes in. It has to perform its role as an trigger in the larger ecosystem of sustainable product innovation. By identifying various technologies and by identifying technologies that have crossed what is called the technology valley of death, we are able to shine a spotlight on a range of technologies. They could be in agriculture and food systems, they could be in energy, they could be in water, they could be a combination of all. We're able to identify those innovations and their related business models that have the potential to scale up. Maybe out of every 20 highlighted, 5 might fail. That's good. That's necessary. Maybe 10 will middle. And maybe 5 others will really scale up. That's the nature of the game. The Zayed Prize can serve that bridge between technologies that are showing promise and policy that takes them to potential. It's that bridge, the absence of which creates a valley of death where the best ideas can crash and burn. So if the Zayed Prize can not only shine that spotlight, but create sufficient confidence on the national and the international policy side, we can completely transform the market in terms of giving innovators, investors, policymakers, and consumers the confidence that various different technologies are ready and available. I think India's sustainable journey is Challenging, but extremely exciting. The first lesson to be learned is that the double transition is possible. What do I mean by this? In 2015, when the Sustainable Development Goals were announced, India had the largest number of people without electricity. It was the same year that the Paris Agreement was decided. So how did India go from the largest number of people without electricity to also becoming a clean energy superpower? It decided to run on both tracks simultaneously. Between 2017 and 2019, India electrified 130 million people, bringing household electrification rates to 99%. This was a huge and rapid transformation. Simultaneously, India also built up its clean energy infrastructure to a stage where it now has more than 50% of its installed electricity capacity coming from non-fossil sources. Its solar power installations are third largest in the world. Overall, its renewable energy installations are the fourth largest in the world. The second lesson is institutions. You can't do this just by willing it. Yes, political will is important. But how do you convert political will into policy signal? How do you convert policy signal into on-ground implementation? India innovated with institutions. It created something called the Solar Energy Corporation of India, which served as an entity in the middle of the power producer and the power consumer. So the clean power producer signed a power sales agreement. The utility, the power utility, signed a power purchase agreement. The risk was de-risked by this entity in the middle. The third thing that was done was market design. Market design meant that India was not relying only on government subsidies to scale up its clean energy story. It focused on creating competitive markets. And that meant introducing reverse auctions. Reverse auctions are a way by which clean energy producers bid against a benchmark tariff, but bid downwards. And the one who bids the lowest gets the allocations of the projects. That means the consumer benefits from clean energy, but at the lowest cost based on transparent market bidding and prices coming down based on market competition. The fourth thing that the world can learn is how India has also started investing in building up its manufacturing capacity when it comes to clean energy. We have gone from less than 20,000 megawatts of solar PV manufacturing capacity to over 100,000 megawatts of solar PV panel manufacturing capacity just within a span of about 5 years. The food, water, energy, and climate nexus is complex. It is getting more complicated, and it will be compounded by climate change. We need water for energy, but what we find is clean energy has the lowest water footprint. So investing in clean energy also helps to save on water. But equally, you need energy for water. You need energy for water pumping. You need energy for water purification. So again, investing in clean energy helps you to deliver cleaner water, more purified water, more water in a more sustainable way. This complexity is already getting complicated with new drivers, data centers, AI, the cooling demand in increasingly hot countries. So optimizing for all resources, whether it's water, land, or energy, has to be a way of dealing with these new complicators in this scenario. And all of this will get compounded by climate shocks. So how do we deal with it? This cannot be just an energy ministry play. It cannot be just a water ministry play. It cannot be just the concern of the environment ministry. The nexus has all these entities interlinked. What we need is policy frameworks that are coherent. What we'll also need is an equity lens so that we can ensure that the demands for energy or for water or for food are met for all communities, not just those with resources, and particularly address the needs of the vulnerable. But this can only get solved at scale when the right policy signals and the right internal corporate decisions are made. So boardrooms have to think about this, how their business continuity gets impacted when a climate shock occurs. Boardrooms in energy companies have to ask themselves, will their company continue operating if water stress emerges? Boardrooms in food companies have to ask, do we have the right energy sources for pumping, for food processing, and so forth? So the role of policymakers, of course, is there, but the role of corporates and investors is also there. But only if we internalize that the nexus is complex, getting complicated, and going to get more compounded by climate change.